Hello and welcome to yet another interesting conversation with interesting people from software development. I'm Alex Bolboaca and I'm coming to you from the Mozaic Works studios, and today my guest has done so many things that I cannot list them all. He's a musician, engineer, leader, entrepreneur, CTO, teacher, and very interested in how people learn. And it's a great pleasure to have this conversation. Welcome, Armagan Amcalar.
Hello, thank you for having me, Alex. This is super exciting. I'm very, very happy to be here. And yeah, I usually talk a lot, but when I'm excited, I talk a little bit more. So feel free to cut me and jump to the next topic as you see fit. I don't actually know what to say. I'm that excited. Thank you.
So I think we met first time in Istanbul, the same day
Yep,
I met Lemi. So
I guess so.
yeah, we were at the
That
same
was a great
conference.
conference. Like these coincidences, these are, I don't know, life-changing events. At least, well, it was for me. I got to know many people there, many wonderful people, and I'm very happy that I also got to meet you there. And it's been like, I don't know how many years, 7 years or something,
I
6, 7 years, something like that.
I think so. I can never remember how long it is since I met somebody, and with some people it feels like I've known them forever because
Exactly, right?
we meet from
There's
time
such a
to time.
match.
Yeah. So, and I think we then met again in Berlin where you were working. I'm not sure. Are you still in
Yes,
Berlin?
yes, I am still in Berlin.
Okay, that's really cool. So, what I like to do in these chats is to explore a bit your career and your decisions, because I think it's very interesting for people to talk about these things that we don't usually have the time
Yeah,
to talk about. Um,
yeah.
so, first question, why did you get into programming?
I don't know. It was a very early decision. I think it was like a shiny toy for me at the time. Um, I my story. I by the way, I watched your talk with Lemmy. I think I have a very similar story. I liked reading books at home, and one day I ran out of books, and the only books that I hadn't read were the user's manual for Commodore 64 computers. And those user manuals had code pieces in them that you can type that would make stuff. And there were like, um, I think an air balloon animation code. You type in, I don't know, like 100 lines and it animates air balloons on the screen. And I was a kid, I was like 6 years old, and this is great. I love this. I'm gonna do this. And I also love to play games. So I thought also like they must be special people who are doing these things. And I was kind of like jealous as well, like creating these wonderful games and programs that other people spending hours and hours with. And I don't know, I think I kept on doing that, tinkering with stuff and tinkering with code. And that was, I think that was my why I went into software engineering or programming. I, of course, was far away, as far as possible away from engineering at that time. But I never left that, I guess. It was fun to play with things, to create things basically out of thin air.
And I know you're also a musician. Do you find there is any connection between the two?
I think, oh, well, yes, many questions. Maybe not exactly in writing code, but how you prepare, how you train yourself, and especially how you perform it. If you're not a solo musician, if you're in an orchestra, if you're playing with a band, you need like perfect synchronization at all costs. And if someone is kind of like breaking that synchronization, the others have to follow up. If your drummer is going out of rhythm, you have to follow that. Otherwise, nobody will listen to you. And I think that nature and that feeling of doing something together is what we really do as software engineers in a team setup. When we're working on a project, like every team member has a role to fulfill, and you never really think who is junior or who is senior. It doesn't matter. When you're on stage, when you're performing, you're doing whatever you need to do, and it has to all click together for the end result to be good. And I think the communication that you have to have within a software engineering team is very similar to what you would have on stage. So I love that bit a lot, and I learned a lot about, especially about team management from managing an orchestra. It's almost like you are a CTO of your own company or of any company. You have deadlines and you have to prepare the team. The difference is in software engineering, you can always shift and extend the deadlines a little bit. You can always say, well, we need 2 more weeks for a concert. You don't have that that option. You have to deliver at the exact day and hour, regardless of whether you're sick or not. No one cares. I mean, of course, you could always cancel the concert. But I think that really affected my estimation skills a lot. It's, as you would probably maybe agree, it's a pain to give estimations, to come up with correct estimations, let's say, or as accurate as possible. And I think I was lucky on that, because I can kind of know when my team will be ready to ship something, and that's my stage experience helped me a lot with hitting those deadlines without really asking for extensions, and aggressively planning it. Now that I come to think of it, I think it also has something to do with software architecture, like how you plan out your concert and how you train your team and your orchestra to operate is very similar to what we do as software architects. Like, there's nothing at hand. You have to just think and imagine the possibilities and weed out the possibilities that are not very interesting, and focus on the thing that you can actually do that is actually viable. Yeah, maybe there are more parallels.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that one of my friends, David Hassman, who unfortunately died a few years ago, he was also a musician, and he kept using these terms that the team needs to get into a rhythm, and you have the beat that you need to look for, and
exactly, yes,
and other things like get into the groove and so on. There were so many things related to music and musical terms. Yeah. I see that I'm looking at your bio, and I see that one of your next steps was to work with digital circuits.
Yes. Oof. That was in my university education. My bachelor's is on microelectronics. It's a sub-branch of electronics engineering that deals with designing digital circuits or analog circuits at a chip level. And I have a very fun story about it. So the year was, I think, 2005, where we were being trained on drawing transistors, thousands of them, to create digital circuits or tiny computers. One goal was to make an adder circuit, 8-bit adder circuit. And then at the time, our design had about 10,000 transistors, and you draw them manually, layer by layer, silicon, metal, and other layers you have to draw on top of each other, and it has to work. And of course, it's like nanometer scale. You're drawing it in a software, almost like a vector drawing software. And if you make a mistake, if something is off by 1 pixels, the entire circuit will not work. You're going to get wonky results. of additions, and you're trying to do just, you know, add two simple numbers up to 8 bits. It's not even a huge adder. So we spent weeks and weeks on designing that circuit and drawing it on the screen and making sure that everything aligns well. And at the time, I also was earning some pocket money and some other amounts of money from freelancing. I was building web pages and back-end and front-end projects. And, you know, those were the years where there was a new trend in software engineering, in web development, pixel perfect applications, CSS applications. So the designers are different than front-end engineers. They give you a design and you have to implement it pixel perfect to the web page. Otherwise, it looks terrible and people don't like it. And designers complain a lot because you butcher their design. So I thought, I found that very natural. You know, for years I was like, I'm very good at CSS applications. I don't care. Like, I can see the difference of a pixel from 1 meter away. Like, this is off by 1 pixel. We need to correct it. And it was very natural to me as a way of developing applications. I think it was around 2010 or 12, I noticed that other people can't do that. Pixel perfect CSS application is a nightmare for CSS developers, and everybody hates it, and they spend hours and hours on it. And I'm like, yeah, sure, like, you just need to move this here and this here a little bit. Then I thought about it, and I figured out that it's probably my digital electronics education that made me this good at CSS implementation, because I'm trained on it. Literally, my life at university depended on my ability to produce those metal and silicon layers as perfect as possible, as real as possible, as pristine and precise as possible. I think there are, so this is something I like to do, drawing parallels between different walks of life, different paths of life. You know, why would you think there is a similarity between digital circuit design and CSS implementation? Like, they don't really seem similar, but I think they are very much alike. If you are good at one, I think it helps the other one as well.
Yeah, and I think I'm actually envious on people who manage to build digital circuits, or at least know how to do that. I've never gotten into it, but I'd really like to be able to to do that. I mean, I have the
It's
theory,
fun.
but it's, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let me tell you this. The most fun part is the theory. And once you have it, the rest is arduous, hard work without much pay. Like, I know this sounds a little bit rough and harsh, but this is one of the reasons for why I left electronics engineering. The theory is great, and you can imagine things, but the time to production is so high. It's like years, 3 years, 5 years, and you just don't want to be doing that. Like, by the time your design is in the hands of people, you are at another company doing something else, designing 5 years ahead in the future. And I don't think that's really fun. This is why I also like to be a conference speaker, because you live in the moment. This is also why I like music and being on stage. You are there in the moment. You do something, and simultaneously people are enjoying it, or they're not. But the time to feedback is really, really short, and you can adapt to this. So this is what I'm most happy about, and this is why I started doing software, because it's very easy. It's just like being on stage. You write the code today, tomorrow it's at the hands of people, and you get feedback from your customers. And electronics, I don't know, it's hard. And you can also, All right, great. I don't know. Please stop me if we're going off topic. But there's this concept of the AI will take over our jobs as software engineers. The AI can write code. You must have seen the what GPT-3 can do. It can produce like web page designs, Google's homepage in React, and so on and so forth. So along those lines, people think that their jobs, software engineering jobs, will be taken over by machines. Here's an example from digital circuit production. No one draws those circuits by hand anymore. It's such an arduous task and such a repetitive process that we invented programming languages called hardware description languages. You write code and it gives you a digital circuit. It draws those lines of transistors automatically for you. So it's not like, it's not a very creative work. The theory is great, but in the end, what you do is you write code. You still write code to create a physical digital circuit. And that part, actual drawing of the circuit or coming up with the transistors, that part is something that we could automate. As early as, I don't know, 80s, we had these programming languages and these software that could draw these digital circuits, these chips for us. So, you know, electronics engineers actually lived through that that revolution, machines taking over their jobs. Nobody needs to, I mean, some people still do, if you're Apple maybe, but usually you just don't draw those circuits by hand anymore. There are machines to do that for you. You just write code, which is maybe it's going to be the same in software engineering in 50 years, but I don't think what we do is replaceable by machines. We are doing a very creative work. We are working with trade-offs, and that is traditionally, that's something machines are not very good at, deciding, judgment. And unless we solve that, unless we turn software engineering into an actual science with like formulas and this is exactly the way you should do it, and you know, we still couldn't even decide whether we want semicolons or not, whether we want tabs or spaces. We couldn't decide. I think we're a little bit far away from coming to laws or formulas of software engineering. So I don't think our jobs are at a risk right now by these AIs. But if there are boring tasks, I hope we can kind of like delegate them to machines or AI so that we can hopefully focus on the more creative aspects of the job, which will be more self, I think it's nutritious, I would say. Like you're feeding your soul if you do creative work. This is also why I like software a lot. It's very creative. There is a limit to my musician capabilities. I'm not that good at music, even though I sing and play the guitar. There's a limit, and I can see that very clearly. Software is much easier to bend those limits.
All right. Yeah, there's a lot to take in here, and I think I agree with you. I don't think AI will take over software engineering, and it's actually quite funny that talking about hardware becomes software more and more. It's
yeah,
with all those languages now. I have been working with a lot of clients who are doing hardware, and fundamentally what they do is they take programmable boards and write code for the programmable boards, and that's it. So
exactly.
And that works fairly well. Now, let me go back still to software engineering, because then we can go into more philosophy and discussions. But I'm curious, when you first learned about unit testing, test-driven development, refactoring, pair programming.
Oh. Ooh. Well, I have like traumas about pair programming. So the year was about 96 or 97. I was part of a group of coders. We had a chat room on an IRC server. They were very cool. and they were way older than me. I was at, I don't know, at high school, I guess. I was writing Visual Basic, and they were mocking me for writing Visual Basic. They were working with C++, with assembly. The worst was using Delphi, and I was using Visual Basic. And they were like calling me, telling me that it's not a real programming language and so on. And they were working together. And I was like, I am learning programming. I would love to work with you if anyone could, maybe want to help me out with this code. I was trying to attempt pair programming there. And now I remember or realize that those were attempts to get better at it by pairing. And that didn't work out well. I was like pushed back. And it was, those people were otherwise good people, but they just like to mock a kid and Visual Basic, of course. So that's my first foray into, I think, pair programming. And then it just didn't work out well for me, and that caused me to go inwards a little bit and to close up and not share enough. Even though I had published my first open source code in '98, there was a web page called Planet Source Code. Do you remember? Mm-hmm. It was the GitHub before GitHub. Mm-hmm. Planet Source Code. Then they lost their entire database alongside all the first codes I had published. I still feel terrible for not keeping a copy. But it never worked out. And I learned a lesson. Then after I became a kind of a team lead, I paid a lot of attention to having people pair up. I think that's one of the best ways to learn. And whenever I hire juniors, I always hire juniors, what I do is I pair them up with other senior people, and they teach a lot to each other. Looking at the code and working on the code, they produce much greater value than just writing code. Because in the end, I think that's teamwork is much more valuable and beneficial in the long run. And unit testing was a topic that occurred to me very late in my career. I remember the first unit tests I saw was with Ruby on Rails, and I was like, "Oh, this is good. This is great." And the year was I don't know, 2006 or something, or 7. I liked the idea, but I had the mistake that everyone does when they see a unit test. Why do I need to write this? I wrote the code. I know what it does. Why do I need to test it with like different inputs? I know it works. I wrote it. And I mistakenly thought that it was an attack on my ability as a coder. Like, I don't trust myself, my team doesn't trust myself or me, and that's why we write tests to prove that my code works. Why do I have to prove it? It's working. I tested it, I tried. And then I think we were tasked with building the world's first single-page application for e-commerce. We had a client in 2011 where, basically we were building an e-commerce application, and I wanted to build it as a single-page app on the front end. And nobody knew what single-page apps were back then. It wasn't a term. And none of these frameworks existed. I doubt if their authors were even coders back then. So we had to invent our own frameworks, and we had a large team, and things didn't work out. It just didn't work out. We didn't have these automated UI testing tools back then as well. So we had to invent our own testing platform based on Qt WebKit to write tests and run them and make sure that the components that we're building are actually valid and built to the specs. That didn't go very well. that was a terrible experience for all of us because it was very hard. It was new for everybody, and all of my team members had the exact same response I had when I first got introduced to testing. Like, why do we write tests exactly? Are you doubting our abilities to write code? No, like, we don't know what we're doing. This is completely new field. We're inventing things here. Things can go wrong, and they will go wrong. We have to have at least some sort of automated way of making sure that we are still realistic. What we're building is actually correct to the specs. And yeah, that was my entry. We did our first bootcamp in the same year, 2011, and I regret that this revolution in our stack back then happened after the bootcamp. So we didn't have unit testing classes in that iteration, and we had to teach everyone again after they had started working. Basically, what we did was we organized a bootcamp and hired 10 people out of that bootcamp for the company, for that project. 10 juniors coming fresh out of university, barely knowing programming. And then we had a very senior developer back then who built this Qt WebKit. It was like, we're going to build tests. We're going to write tests. And this is how you do tests. And this is the ABC of unit testing and integration testing. It was a, it wasn't a failed experiment. In the end, we were able to do that and write tests for the framework, for the project. But it was a very hard mindset change for the company and for the team back then. Yeah. Do I talk too much?
No, not at all. That's quite interesting because discussing with people, I realized that I had a unique experience with unit testing because one of my first projects was in C++ and was with a guy from Belgium who insisted that we should do everything right. And so he insisted to write unit tests, and there was no framework for C++ for unit testing, so we wrote our own framework, which is actually quite simple. It's not so hard. I can do it now in almost any language. In probably 1 or 2 hours, I can have a useful starting framework for unit tests.
Yeah.
And then after that project ended, it was very weird for me to see that other people don't know unit testing. It was,
yeah.
And we kept having those. And that project was also influential for me in the sense that every line of code was reviewed, and we had like 3 books that we had to know because it was C++. So there were like tens of rules that you needed to follow, and somebody would slap your hand if if you didn't follow those rules. So it was, yeah, it wasn't always, let's say, fun. There were some moments when it was less fun, but it was extremely influential, and I learned a lot there. Yeah. So
I think.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you about your what you did next, and I think you've done a few things. So you've done you started startups. You've been software architect. What made you start various companies and startups? And
I think I was very lucky to work at that my first full-time gig was at a company that was very innovative, and it's where I did all of these things, and we were so aligned that we then became partners and created this startup incubator. I don't know, we just wanted to, we liked tinkering with stuff. They were very like-minded people, and we weren't happy with the projects that we were getting and the projects that we were building, even though, you know, it led to building front-end frameworks and single-page applications when nobody was doing that it's still, in the end, you were working for other people. And we were like, what if we took this experience that we built up and started our own companies? We also had some money on the side to do that, some seed investments. So we said, okay, fine, we're gonna try it. We were very young. So we said, okay, we're gonna try for a couple of years. What could go wrong? Until we realized that things can go really, really wrong. And you can go bankrupt. And that's not a sweet experience, of course. But it was a good lesson to be had. I think life was it played out very differently. My goal was to do a PhD on neuroscience. My master's is in brain signals processing, so my field was taking brain signals and typing with them, or making people type with their brain signals, transforming those signals to something that the computers can understand. And I was very fixed on doing a PhD in Europe. I was in Turkey back then. And I met this company. One of my friends invited me to do an interview because their front end was terrible and they didn't have a front end engineer, and they were looking for someone to make it right, to make the front end right. And I told them that I'm going to work here for 6 months and then I'm going to go do a PhD. So if you're okay with that, it would be great for me to earn some money before I go on a journey for 5 years. And they were like, sure, we'd love to work with you. And they were very cool about it. And then I understood why they were so cool about it, because I loved them. The environment was great. It was my first full-time software engineering job out of school. And I was like blown away by the innovation that we could create. And I think the company was good. I was very lucky. Our CTO was very influential, and he was also very good. And I decided not to do a PhD. I was like, okay, this is great. I like software. What am I gonna do for the next 5 years? Publish papers, and what's my impact gonna be? I think I like software a little bit better, because again, as I told you, it's like live feedback from people. And I decided to stay, and it became a 5-year-long engagement where we created several startups, several successful startups. We got seed fundings for them. We got Series A fundings for them. We still, the parent company still went bankrupt at the end. But I think that was, it had its reasons. But it taught us a lot. And yeah, there's always this urge to do one more thing, to go one more step ahead, and to explore. Some people, when they go online and read tutorials or blog posts or books about a topic, when they complete their literature survey, they're like, okay, this is fine. I'm going to go back and apply this to my work. And I'm always like, this is great, but can I actually improve this a little bit, a tiny bit? And I try to work on that and then bring it back to my company or to my work and apply that. So that's edge of innovation, I think, was what drove us to build several startups and interesting ideas, to enjoy an environment of growth and learning. Is I think that's my impression of that era of my life right now. We were free to learn and grow. We didn't make any money in that journey for about 2.5, 3 years. That was a mistake. And now I learned that. Now I'm trying to apply that to my new company. Because I think I cannot work at a job where I don't create things to my liking. Like I always want to improve.
Yeah, I find it very interesting because I don't know many developers who actually want to do startups. It's usually they run away from the business side, and
True.
doing a startup is more about maybe it's a cool idea, something like that. Let's try some technology, let's try some, but without actually understanding the whole grinding there is with customers and finding customers and
Yes.
getting money and
Yes.
all the challenges that you have. And
True. That's also why we failed the first time. we didn't do that part. We thought we could build cool products and people would naturally sign up and use our products. Some people did, but it was impossible to monetize it. You're so right about that grinding aspect. I still find it grinding. In fact, today my friends, my colleagues at the company was making fun of me because I said I was supposed to have an interview with a candidate, an introduction interview, and I don't think there would be a match, a student candidate, and I don't think they would sign up for the school. And I said I would rather stalk them than talk to them, to get their profiles, to learn about them. So I would rather go on LinkedIn and Twitter and GitHub to see what they have created so far, instead of talking to them for, I don't know, half an hour, for an hour. This is a little bit sad, but I think this is mostly because I'm a developer still. Even if I did all these ventures, at heart I'm still a developer, and it's still easier for me to avoid conversations and to avoid sales pitches. Trying to sell something to someone is extremely difficult. I just can't do that. So yeah, that's also what I tell people when I kind of advise them. If you're not gonna be okay doing this for your company, don't start a company.
yeah,
It's gonna be really challenging to try to sell it.
yeah. Yeah, so I find this interesting because on one hand you say that you find it difficult to have conversations with people and so on, but I've known you for a long time and I think you are one of the most soft-spoken and people who naturally it's easy to talk to and it's easy to discuss, and I think you are also a leader in many of the organizations that you've been at.
Yep.
So how do these two things match?
I think I have a mental separation in the things I actually like to do. I love to be with people. I crave being with people. And I miss the office environment as well. I actually love working at home, but when we can go to the office, because I like to go to the office from time to time to see real people. And this past year has been really tough for me in that sense. And I love being with people about the things that I want to talk about and about doing things that I like doing and not, selling a product. I don't feel like it. I just can't do it. I can't talk to investors. I mean, if I have to, yes, I can. It's not that I can't, but it's really grinding my meat to do that. And when you start a company, you have to do that for a very long time. That also had an effect on me in the past year. So I don't know. I think if the result is mutual happiness and we're going to create something together, I'm more than happy to talk, and I'm really sociable about that with my my colleagues, my team members, my open source collaborators, my friends, you and all the conference crew. I love doing these things. When it comes to customers, I love talking to them to get feedback, but I'm terrible on the phone. I cannot pick it up. There's been so many instances where I avoid phone calls. Yeah, it also affected the business, the last business, the school. we were trying to get accredited by the German government as a teaching institution to in Germany, and the government office was trying to call us to tell us about our certificate, which is really important for us to get to do business. And I avoided their call for 2 weeks. I just didn't pick up the phone because it was a German number, and my German is really bad. That aside, I have an anxiety. I don't know. I'm afraid to talk on the phone. So I didn't pick up the phone for 2 weeks. That's why we had to delay the certificate for 2 weeks. Apparently, of course, I didn't know. And they didn't send an email. They kept calling me every day without sending an email. Like, you could at least tell me what you're calling me for. Send an SMS or something to let me know that it's okay. The world will not burn if I pick up the phone. But yeah, I'm a little bit awkward on these type of conversations. I don't know. It might be contradictory, but I feel at home and very comfortable with my friends and colleagues, and not so much with customers for selling things or government agencies. They're terrifying.
And I like to insist a bit on this leadership and on your style of leadership, because I've seen you in action with your teams, and it's obvious that the feeling there is very, how to say, everybody feels relaxed, and it's very nice, and people, they want to be there. You can see that whenever I've seen you with teams, they want to be there.
True.
And everybody was open, and because you brought me once for a training, and one of the things that I look at in the beginning of the training is how open people are, because this tells me a lot about how to proceed with the trainings and so on. And I could see there that there was no problem. It was all the work was done, so we could actually move to interesting stuff. How do you create this atmosphere? What is the sauce to it?
I think what I like is a college atmosphere or a student club atmosphere where people are there for other reasons than just money, or I have to do this because I need a visa and this is the only company that is going to accept me. Even if that's true, that could be true. But what I really like is to connect people at a different level, at a different state of mind, and that is a common shared purpose. Why are we actually doing this? And is there a better way for us to do it? A core element of this is the feedback culture and eliminating hierarchy. In that company, I was pressured many times by the higher management, by the CEO and others, to create separation in my team and to create hierarchy in the team. And I always said, no, we're a single team. We're like 12, 13 people. We're going to be a single team. There's no need to separate these into like 3-4 people groups, because we are small enough. And this sense of equality between people, regardless of their seniority, sharing responsibility with them, and making them feel that it's totally safe to not know things, to tell about them, to ask for help, and to give feedback, to tell us. I'm doing this for 20 years now. There may be certain things that I'm missing. I learned in a very different way. So I've never been a junior in the true sense of the word that we use right now. So I may not be able to see what we're missing, what we're lacking there in terms of support. Feel free to talk about them, to demand them. That is your right. And I think this assurance that I'm cool with everything they tell me, and this feedback culture and this culture of constant change and improvement, and you can be yourself, whoever you are, you can be yourself. You have nothing to hide, including the salaries, by the way. I think that makes people feel relaxed and really focus on the content to learn, really focus on the projects to deliver, and building more this sense of being a better team member, being there for your friend when they're not there. This is also why I never really take into account vacations or something when I'm doing project planning, because I think we're like an organism, and the team is alive, and if someone is out on vacation, it's fine, we can cover. The work will naturally shift. It won't mean that we will do overtime and overwork, but it means that we're gonna kind of like consume that lack, that void, and fill it with maybe better communication, with prioritization, and maybe leaving out a couple of cards on the board when you're delivering that deadline because you're lacking on some development talent. But in the end, nobody would feel any stress about it. That's just natural. We're there for each other. Of course, everybody will share their vacation time, and it's 25 days in Germany. It's quite a long time. Like for a full month, people can be off. And if you're a small team, these things matter. Like if you have a team of 200 people, maybe it's easier to balance. If you have a team of 10, it counts. You really feel that gap. But I think, having this sense of shared ownership and shared identity, and giving them a purpose to come to the office every day and to work with others every day, and the feeling that we support them, not only in terms of their technical capabilities, but also their soft skills as well. Like we had many different workshops, like public speaking workshop in the team, just to make them feel a little bit more comfortable doing presentations and so on. And I think it helps. It really helps in building up that culture.
So this is part of it. It's building this culture of sharing, learning from each other, openness, collaboration.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you as a leader, you often also have some constraints you need to set. I mean, I always think when I have been a team leader, I used to set, like, we need to write unit tests. This is how we write them, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
How about this other side? How does this work?
Great. I think I love talking about this because I love building these engineering teams and their culture from the very beginning. One thing I learned: when someone joins a team, they are almost always very open to absorb anything you give them as the de facto standard. And they don't know the past, so they're not tainted by the problems you had in the past. And if you are setting up a team from scratch, you have to be a leader where you lead by example. You have to show and do exactly what you tell them. For example, I love writing documentation, and I expect my teams to write a lot of documentation about everything, about deployments. I'm still one of those software architects that do UML diagrams, and I ask my teams to design UML diagrams before they write code. So I like to have a wiki and all this documentation about everything from day one, and I start writing them myself. And when I start hiring people, I tell them, hey, this is what I'm doing right now. Just take on. And these are the tests. This is the automation. This is the documentation. Keep doing that, and that comes very naturally because they don't know anything else in that company, and they want to succeed in that company, and they want to stay in that company. And they think, hey, this is the norm, so I'm going to keep doing it. Whereas if you don't do what you preach, and if you, I think This also has to do with the type of people you hire. I love opinionated people, but I also love when they're open to new possibilities. And we already have that environment where we can discuss everything. We can change the way we build things. So if you have a better idea, please bring it to the table. We're going to be more than happy to discuss. We can change as long as we all agree as a team that it's a better future for us. So if they're open, if they're opinionated, they're going to positively affect the team. And we're going to change the way we do things. For example, I wasn't a fan of Kubernetes. And until the day we hired a DevOps engineer, I was running my own cloud installation and based on Docker Compose. And the DevOps engineer was very opinionated. And I was like, this is terrible. We have to use Kubernetes. And like, I cannot maintain this. This is impossible. This is not professional. And up until that level, it had served us well. And I didn't have much experience in Kubernetes. But I was like, okay, fine. Like, you have to write documentation. You have to teach people how you do things, because that's what we do. And I paired an intern that I knew that I would hire after their internship would end. I paired him with an intern and said, you have to teach this intern the basic operations of our cloud on Kubernetes. And that intern will teach the rest of the team, including our lead developers. And the DevOps engineer was like, I can't do that. I can't. This is ridiculous. An intern, like, this is so much automation and so much infrastructure. An intern will not understand. I was like, yeah, but we don't really have that kind of ranks in our team. So, and I see that you're very excited about this Kubernetes project. It won't work if we cannot scale that knowledge. And I cannot have you spend time on teaching others, because you need to be on top of the system all the time, because we're running in production. It took me some time to convince him, but in the end, I convinced him to teach the intern. The intern was amazing in absorbing all the knowledge, being able to operate on their own, write more documentation, write tests to test the system, and also then teach other people how to work with that environment. And everyone was happy. In the end, the DevOps engineer came to me and said, well, I'm very happy that you made me teach the intern, because I actually found out that I like to teach. And in the end, we were able to scale our team, and all the developers were actually able to operate on that infrastructure and change anything if necessary, and run for help, run to help if there is an emergency. I think this is that team culture where you tell them and show them how they should do their jobs, and in the end, it's going to be better for them and for everyone. It's not easy to be there at all times to show, but once you give them that confidence, and once they see for themselves that it's actually working and it's a better idea, they keep doing it. And for example, when we first did the workshop with you, we had a couple of tests, but we didn't really have CI/CD automation. Our code coverage was like 5%. It was terrible. And it wasn't the team culture. That's why we asked for help. And I wouldn't do a very good job at making it a team culture. But after our workshop, we decided as a team that this is our new standard. From now on, we won't accept any pull requests that don't test themselves automatically. That doesn't come with, like, I don't know, 80-90% code coverage. And that became a team culture. We dedicated 2 people teams to write tests from time to time for the untested parts of the code, even for our mobile applications as well. And that worked out really, really well afterwards. And if you give them the sense of we can change things, people actually want to help. They have ideas, and they have good ideas, and they are willing to take responsibility. I think it's harder to kill the interested person, the motivated person, the enthusiastic person in them. But companies, for some reason, do a great job in killing that motivation, killing that enthusiasm. No developer would go into a company and say, yeah, I don't want to work. I came here not to work. They are there to cause a good change. You shouldn't block them. You can direct it to the right channels and to the right effort, but you shouldn't block them. And when you show them the path, I think it works out very well.
Yeah, and often the problem is bureaucracy or
Yes.
gatekeepers, or so it's always.
Yeah.
But it's so nice to hear these stories from you, because as a coach, one reason why I really wanted to work with people and to help them and so on is because I believe most developers can get to much higher potential. We have such a high potential, and very few of us actually get to the level of their potential. And one of the reasons is our own fears. That's always a problem. Afraid to risk things, afraid of losing things, and so on. But there are also the other reasons, which are systemic. The system in which you work, which kind of strangles you and pushes you into a box.
Yes.
And those can be changed, but it's so hard to do. And it's, as you say, it's probably much easier to build them from scratch rather than change something that already has a huge history of doing it very differently. Now, you mentioned hiring, and I like to go a bit here because I know you've hired a lot of people, and I know you also hire very inclusively. And it's an interesting point. How do you do your hiring?
I think so. I don't know where to start. I think what's really important for me is this genuine interest to improve things for the better. This is what I'm looking for in people. And even when I'm hiring a senior engineer, I don't exactly hire for the skill set of the technical skill set that they have. Because especially if it's a field I'm comfortable in, I'm always like, I can teach you this in a couple of weeks or maybe months. But what I cannot have is that sense of responsibility, sense of purpose, and that genuine enthusiasm. So this is the basis of my hiring, not diplomas, not schools. I don't care if you're a CS graduate or not. We're doing web development or app development or any cloud. It doesn't require a PhD in computer science. It's relatively well known how to build these type of software. So we're not looking for geniuses. We're looking for authentic people who can understand other people, who can work with them. And this rarely comes from mediocre white men. You have to have a good balance in the team to have, as you said, an inclusive environment where you can create more, because certain things people bring from their own culture and from their own background, and they can reflect to their jobs. And that's actually a very valuable thing to have in the team. They can, especially if you have a feedback culture, if you're open to discuss and improve things, one thing they can say from their past, for example, if they were in marketing before, if they were in, I don't know, international business relations or whatever, every developer brings their own view to the table, and you never know when those good ideas will pop up, where they're going to come from. So that's why I'm always on the lookout for people, regardless of their background, who have this authentic way of approaching others. And it's not easy, especially to have gender diversity in your teams in hiring. Unfortunately, the industry is still overrun by men. 90% of the developers are still men. And what we have to do is to even this out. It's too easy to accept, hey, this is the state of the industry. So we're going to have 9 male developers and 1 female developer. And because this is the norm. Well, but that's not very natural. Nature does not work that way. So what we can do, if we can, and I'm sure we can, to improve it is to kind of try to tip the balance a little bit. So whenever I hire in my teams, I try to make sure we have an even split between genders. And at some companies, I even hire specific recruitment agencies just for this, just to make diversity happen. At UNO, for example, I had many, I think 5 agencies looking for women developers. And it took a lot of time. It wasn't easy on our part as well. But in the end, they were able to find real good talents from all over the world. And at UNO, we were able to hit that balance of 50-50. And that is something I'm very proud of. That's something I kept doing in all of my teams. This requires special attention of building the right culture, the right inclusive culture, and investing a little bit more in terms of effort into hiring a diverse team. I can understand that many companies don't want to do this because it's a lot of time and money investment. But in the end, there are certain things that you cannot measure on Excel in terms of value, and diverse opinion is one of them. Especially if you don't have it, you don't know what you're missing. And it's almost like trying to talk about colors to a person who cannot see colors. Like, there's no concept. You cannot really explain it, how diversity is enhancing the team, how it actually opens up your non-diverse members of your team as well. You only need to experience it to see how good it is. And so I kind of can see how a lot of companies don't really do this, but I do it whenever I can.
And another thing that I think is interesting is you mentioned the possibility of people to bring new ideas on the table, and you discuss those and so on. As developers, we are not very good at discussing. Right? It's often we often get into arguments, and you mentioned some of the stupid arguments that we had, like tabs versus spaces, and I think there are still huge posts today about tabs versus spaces, which is it just blows my mind. Why would anybody care about that still? So we know that let's say the standard of arguing in developers is not very high, and I'm curious what you do about this. Do you mediate? Do you teach them to argue, or?
Exactly. Here's another example from our move to Kubernetes. I like opinionated people, and I'm also very opinionated about things. So I like argumentation a lot. But it's actually a science argumentation, and there's a way to do it. It has its own methodologies. So I had asked this colleague of mine, the DevOps engineer, to convince us to go to Kubernetes. And I asked him to write an article about it, to underline the differences, the benefits clearly. The article was full of adjectives. And, Kubernetes is superior, it's better in this way and that, and it's so easy to use. Whenever you see so and followed by an adjective, you should ditch that sentence and rewrite it with facts. And I told him that the article was great. The article he came up with was fun to read. It was bashing Docker Compose and praising Kubernetes. That was great. But I told him that I cannot open this up for arguments because it's full of personal subjective opinions and not facts. It's full of adjectives. And he was like, what do you mean by like subjective opinions? These are not subjective. Everyone writes about them. Everybody knows about them. He was like, I was like, fine, then put citations. And I also gave him a tip. It's very easy to spot. Look at the adjectives that you're using, replace them with data. And he did it for a week. And the end result was like probably one of the best articles I've ever seen that compares a Docker Compose based infrastructure orchestration platform and Kubernetes. It was based on facts, and it was very clear. And you know, and we brought that up for discussion. And I asked, you know, if anyone has better data to argue against this, please provide it. Otherwise, we're going to go and use Kubernetes, even though I was a fan of Docker Compose. I think this being open to change your mind with data and references is key. And that's why I'm not really interested in tabs versus space or semicolons versus no semicolons arguments. I don't care at all, because you cannot really back that up with data. If you can, I'm happy to use whatever you want. If you have a linter that decides what the format should be, I'm just going to use it. I don't care. It's bike shedding. It's very little return of investment on those arguments. But for the other stuff that matters, I ask people to come up with data, and I ask them to be as objective as possible by not using adjectives. When you're talking about a topic that you're passionate about, it's very easy to reflect your own feelings about it to your arguments. But if you strip that away, I think what remains is really valuable and something that we can talk about.
So we are getting closer to the end of our talk, but I cannot. There's one topic that I really want to ask you about. You've done a lot of development schools, development bootcamp, development.
Yeah.
You know, some of them inspired by the software craft movement, some of them before that. And I know you have a lot of experience there. And I'd really like to hear more about what your ideas around educating software developers are.
I think so. In the end, it's education. It's gathered under the topic of education. And education as we know it today has been put into motion in mid-19th century. So it only has a history of 150 years, 170 years or something. And it was 150 years ago, it was exactly the same as we do it today, with textbooks, with whiteboards, whatever, blackboards and chalk, with quizzes and exams. And I think that was a good model for a very long time. As we can see, we built our entire world on that. But I don't think that is very applicable to all areas, and especially software. Software is very abstract. It's not even I don't like to call it an engineering field, because any respectable engineering field would laugh at this organization in software engineering. We don't really know what software engineering is. It's very young. It has been like 70 years since we have this field. It's so young that we don't really fully understand it. So we're still exploring. So you cannot really teach it with textbooks or that usual methods of teaching. People have various methods of learning. And what I like is learning by doing. I think, and learning by mistake, either your own mistakes or others' mistakes, learning by questioning, learning by understanding and asking. And so that's why I set out to create these schools. At university, I was a teaching assistant and I was teaching CS classes as well, even though I was an electronics major. I was still teaching CS classes, and introduction to CS with C++ and so on. And that I didn't like that way of teaching people programming. Like, I never teach for loops. I never teach variables or arrays. They have to come naturally. You have to have a reason to learn those concepts first. The first lecture I like to have is object-oriented programming, because I came up with a narrative that people can relate to, even if they don't know software engineering, even if they don't know programming at all. I start with the concept of an object, and I talk about object relations. And when there are multiple objects doing multiple things, then you introduce the concept of an array and array iteration in a very natural way. And the goal is to make them do things all the time, write code, explore, and see if it works or not. And I think this is a better model of education. So that's why I created all these schools. And I like to teach people who are changing careers because they have a lot of motivation. And I build a curriculum that is kind of built as a narrative. It is a story. It takes you from the very beginning and makes you a developer who has an app in the cloud. They deploy to the cloud, and they also release an open source library in this latest school. The last lecture we have is writing an open source library and publishing it, which is crazy. This is a 3-month programming school. You were an artist, a painter before. You're a business person, and you're doing this right now. So that learning by doing is really effective in teaching people a new thinking model. And we also talk about topics like software architecture, design patterns, and solid principles to people who never saw code before, because I think they're really important in being a good programmer. And they shouldn't be exclusively to the very experienced developers. They should be taught at schools at maybe not CS 101, but CS 102, definitely. So this is what we do differently in all of my schools, and it works so far.
That's so cool. So before we end, we have 6 questions that we introduced a few weeks ago, and I'd like to go through them.
Yep.
First question, what book did you like and would recommend?
The topic that we didn't talk about, refactoring. I just love it.
Yeah, the book on refactoring by Martin Fowler, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. I think, so it's funny, I think there are a few books that everybody knows about, but very few people read. The book on refactoring is one of them, and the other is The Mythical Man Month.
I actually haven't read that one.
Yeah, well, I think everybody should. It is quite... Second question, and for the audience, I changed this a bit. And now it's, what category of books you don't read too much and why?
Personal development books. I don't read them because I think people learn by experiencing it themselves.
Okay. What topic do you think is not discussed enough in the industry, in our communities?
Software architecture. We never discuss it deep enough. We don't let juniors in, and that's one of the biggest mistakes, I think. It's this, software architects have their marble towers, and I just don't like it.
Okay. What topic do you think is discussed too much in the industry or in the communities?
Ooh. New tools and new frameworks, and the importance we give to tools, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. Just do your job, write code, and make it work, make it good. You don't need to invent a new tool every 6 months or so. You don't need to change your entire code base every 6 months. Best practices cannot change that fast. It's impossible.
What would be your ultimate career achievement? Something that you do and then you say, I could retire now, even if you don't have the money to retire, but you feel like you could retire.
Having created the software development school, not as a school, but as an approach. I call it nimble software development. It's a play on the word agile. Like if everybody knew about this better way of writing code and saving time and effort, I think, and they attributed that to me, of course, I think that would be my ultimate career achievement.
Cool. What advice would you give to a younger version of yourself?
I would say, keep on and don't worry. I worried a lot, and I was very afraid, as I told you, like people were mocking me for the programming language I was using. I was worrying a lot about that. That didn't help much. I would change that.
Yeah, I'd like to reinforce this message because I sometimes see people are get mocked into their teams, and I always say that. So if people are mocking you for the language you're using, telling you that, I don't know, HTML is not a language or whatever, they are not good enough. Don't listen to their feedback.
Yeah.
Focus on what you are doing, learn more, find another team that is better. These are the things you should be doing. I hate when this happens.
Exactly.
All right. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed and that you'd like to share with the audience?
I think we have covered a lot of ground. It feels like it's been only 10 minutes, but I can see the hour, and no, I think we covered all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Where can people find you?
Twitter, I think, is the best. I have a cryptic nickname that I found in the 90s, so it's a little bit difficult. But yeah, I'm very active on Twitter.
I will add it in the show notes, so look down below if you want to to find his Twitter.
Oh, do we do that? Like, hit the bell button, subscribe to get notifications of upcoming streams.
Well, I like to do it a bit different, and this is what I wanted to do next. But yeah, thank you, Armagan. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I think we would have about 4 more hours to discuss at least about a lot of the topics, and perhaps we'll repeat this again. But yeah, I'd like to thank you, and
thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Okay, so as Armagan was saying, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you enjoyed it, we have to pay our dues to the YouTube algorithm. So like, share, subscribe, write a comment, tell other people. Let's not forget to also communicate. Maybe you want to tell other people and not necessarily send a link about what you learned here and what you find interesting. Ask us questions if you would like us to chat about other interesting topics. We are always happy to know what you'd like to see. So we are continuing the series of conversations. There will be one every week. We have a lot of interesting people. Also leading up to ITACAN conference, which is coming in May, and Armagan will also be a speaker there, so you can see him again there. Thank you so much, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.